It is a truth universally acknowledged that any man in possession of a YouTube channel will at some point fall sick and have to make a video with a sore throat and a nasally voice. So I apologize for that. But on the subject of things that ail me, I of course care somewhat about sustainability. But at the same time, I am human, and as a human, I like to eat things like chicken and mutton, and I like to drink milk. And there, what I believe in and what I am are sort of at odds with each other. I'm sure everyone has this kind of cognitive dissonance within them, and everyone deals with it in their own ways. This year, I decided to deal with some of mine by deciding to give up mutton and mammal meat in general, but in India, that basically means giving up mutton. There are many reasons why the world, myself included, is moving away from the consumption of animal products. There is, of course, the ethical side of it, but on this channel, we deal with cold hard facts. We matters of morality, philosophy, they don't even come close to scratching the surface of my icy cold heart. The only reason against animal products that makes sense to me personally is that they are unsustainable. Compared to fish, chicken, or plant-based food sources, ruminant meat is extremely land intensive and produces a huge amount of greenhouse gases. It requires the decimation of vast tracts of forested or natural grasslands to convert them into pastoral lands. The cattle that graze on these pastoral lands basically convert grass into methane farts. And methane is 28 times stronger than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. As a result, the animal husbandry industry is responsible for about 15% of the total global carbon emissions. Even though most of these emissions are happening in beef eating countries, the point somehow becomes even more clear when we look at the Indian meat industry. Indian diets consist of about 0.4% of mutton. In contrast, mutton is responsible for about 12.5% of all greenhouse emissions by the Indian agriculture industry. This means that from a sustainability point of view, eliminating animal products from your diet is a no-brainer. And thankfully, plants do not fart, so you never have to worry about those. Wait a minute. Before we go blaming rice for farting all over the place, let's put things into a little bit of context. You see, cows and also some humans get a lot of blame for producing methane, but it's not their fault. They might have dealt what you have smelled, but they certainly did not produce it. All of the smells and the methane in your farts are produced by bacteria, and the bacteria that produce methane specifically are known as methanogens. Methanogens are usually found in the guts of cattle and about 60% of all humans. So the next time someone blames you for having a smelly fart, you can just pass the blame on to some bacteria. But the question still remains, how does rice fart? So, a little bit of farming lesson. To grow rice, you have to keep the soil saturated with water at all times. In conventional paddy farming, this is done by just flooding the field and leaving it like that forever. This method produces the best yields, but it consumes a huge amount of water and makes this cultivation susceptible to droughts. And for the purposes of our conversation, it produces a lot of methane. The soil under all that water is cut off from oxygen, creating the perfect environment for methanogen bacteria to do their smelly magic and produce methane as a byproduct of their anaerobic metabolisms. This is the exact same process that is happening in the stomachs of cows and some humans, and means that rice cultivation alone is responsible for about 12% of all methane emissions and 1.7% of all greenhouse gas emissions globally. Now let's be clear here. 1.7% is extremely small compared to 14.5% for the animal husbandry industry, especially when you consider that it produces many more calories for the same amount of greenhouse gas emissions. So the lesson here is not to stop eating rice. Most of the reduction in our food-based carbon footprint is still going to come from the elimination of animal-based food products. So do that. Do not stop eating rice. I'm only talking about this because the research is interesting and rice farts make for a funny title. So let's look at some of this interesting research about water saving and low methane producing rice cultivation. A comprehensive summary of these methods can be found in this 2021 review paper. Of particular interest to our discussion here is the practice of AWD, or alternate wetting and drying. In this method, instead of flooding the field and keeping it flooded continuously, we flood the field and then we allow the water to dry up almost completely, and then we flood it back up again. This of course uses much less water, but also it interrupts the anaerobic conditions that are so good for the methanogenic bacteria and can lead to reduction of methane emissions of up to 70%. However, there is a reason why we do things the way we do them now. In the absence of continuous flooding, rice just doesn't grow as well, which can lead to a reduction in yield of about 20%. This makes it very difficult to convince farmers to adopt this method, especially in areas where there is no shortage of irrigation water. Or that's what I would say if techniques like SRI did not exist. System of rice intensification, or SRI, is a very counterintuitive method of growing rice. It claims to produce more rice by using fewer seeds, less water, and less fertilizer. In this system, 2 to 3 very young saplings of rice are transplanted into the field and are given a much bigger area to grow into than conventional rice farming, where 4 to 5 much older saplings might be transplanted into the field. This results in a rice plant that just grows differently because it has more space to grow into and has less competition from its neighbors. Now, I couldn't find a single big review paper that looks at the efficacy of AWD plus SRI practices, but looking at multiple experimental studies from China, India, and Bangladesh, the consensus seems to be that both of these practices combined lead to rice cultivation that is higher yield, uses fewer seeds, uses less water, less fertilizers, produces less methane, and at the same time can be more profitable for the farmers. So, what's the holdup? Why haven't we not implemented this everywhere? Well, it's because both of these practices are extremely technology and labor intensive. For example, in AWD, you have to very closely monitor the soil moisture levels and adjust your irrigation accordingly. This requires the installation of at least some technology. And compared to continuously flooded fields, SRI fields require frequent weeding, which increases our labor costs. The review paper that I have been referencing claims that the increase in efficiency will compensate for the extra costs. But since 91% of the world's rice cultivation happens in Asia, in mostly developing countries, it is not hard to see that change will take time to come. This video was a weird one to make because I really don't want the takeaway to be that rice is bad or you should stop eating rice. Don't do that. If you want to make any changes in your life for sustainability purposes, try switching to a milk alternative. Try to stop eating meat of any kind for a month, maybe 2 months, maybe 3 months. See how that affects you. I just found it extremely interesting and surprising somewhat that an established food crop that is grown all over India, and I would have thought that we have optimized it in every way possible. And turns out there's still significant room for improvement. Simply because when we began cultivating this crop, sustainability was not a concern at all. And this is true for so many other systems in our lives, like the transport network, like our electric grids. All of them were created and built at a time when sustainability was not a concern at all. The only concern was to use the resources that are available to us, because if we don't use it, someone else will use it. And it made sense at the time. But now that we are having to go back and retrofit these systems for sustainability, we are finding out that it is not that easy. Yeah, and there's so much more to discuss about the sustainability of the Indian food supply chain. But I'm sure that I'll get to those topics in a future blog post or a future video. So go look at my blog and subscribe to this YouTube channel to find out more.